Have you ever noticed that silence is never truly empty? That when the world around you falls quiet, another world begins to speak? In that stillness, between your thoughts, between your breaths, there lies a presence ancient and immeasurable. It is the silence that the mystics revered, the silence that sages sought in caves, deserts, and mountaintops. And yet, this silence is not far away. It is here, within you, waiting to be remembered. We live in an age of noise, not just the literal noise of traffic, machines, and voices, but a deeper, more suffocating noise, the constant chatter of the mind, the endless stream of information, the demands of a world that never sleeps. Our ancestors warned us about this. They knew that when human beings forgot the art of stillness, they would lose their connection to the divine. For silence has always been more than the absence of sound. It is a gateway, a teacher, a power in its own right. Imagine walking into an ancient temple, its walls carved with symbols and mysteries you cannot yet understand. At first, you look for words, for inscriptions, for teachings written down. But the greatest teaching is not in the carvings. It is in the silence that envelops the space. You feel it pressing gently upon you, stripping away distractions, making you aware of something larger, more infinite, more eternal than yourself. That silence is not emptiness. It is fullness beyond measure. Throughout history, silence has been associated with wisdom, initiation, and transformation. In the Hermetic tradition, silence was considered one of the first steps toward true knowledge, because to hear the voice of the universe, one must first quiet the noise within. The Pythagoreans, followers of the mystical philosopher Pythagoras, practiced years of silence before they were allowed to speak of sacred truths. Indigenous shamans entered into long fasts of silence to commune with the spirits of the earth. And monks, both in the East and West, preserve the tradition of holy silence, understanding that in silence, the soul learns to hear what the ears cannot. In this video, we will journey into the hidden depths of silence, not as mere absence, but as living presence. We will explore the historical and philosophical roots of silence in spiritual traditions, uncover its esoteric meanings, and understand why it has always been considered a path to awakening. Then, we will look at silence through the lens of inner experience, how it changes the mind, heals the body, and expands consciousness. Finally, we will uncover practical ways to invite silence into your daily life, not as an escape from the world, but as a way to master it. So, let us begin with a profound question. What if silence is not the opposite of sound, but the womb from which all sound and all creation emerges? If this is true, then silence is not something to avoid or fear. It is the very foundation of spiritual power. And by entering it, we are not withdrawing from life. We are returning to its source.
Silence has always held a sacred place in the great spiritual traditions of the world. Far from being an accidental byproduct of life, it was seen as a deliberate force, an essential ingredient of wisdom, creation, and transformation. To understand the power of silence, we must first look at how ancient civilizations and esoteric schools of thought revered it. In the Egyptian mystery schools, silence was considered one of the highest virtues. The initiate who spoke too soon or revealed too much risked not only their own progress, but the harmony of the universe itself. Silence was a shield, protecting sacred knowledge from misuse. The god Harpocrates, often depicted as a child with his finger pressed to his lips, symbolized this secret. To the Egyptians, silence was not weakness, it was strength, the strength of knowing when to withhold and when to act. In the Pythagorean brotherhood of ancient Greece, new disciples were required to take a vow of silence lasting years. They could listen, observe, and absorb, but not speak. Why? Because words once spoken are like arrows released from a bow. They cannot be recalled. Silence taught patience. It honed perception. It trained the initiate to sense subtler forms of knowledge, the kind that comes not from speech, but from resonance, intuition, and inner vision. The East carries the same reverence. In Taoism, silence is not an empty void, but the natural state of the Tao itself, the unnameable source from which all things arise. Lao Tzu wrote that silence is a source of great strength, reminding us that what is unspoken often has more power than what is proclaimed. In Buddhism, silence is a central practice. The Buddha himself warned against idle chatter and taught that true speech can only arise from inner stillness. In Zen, the great masters would often answer students' questions not with words, but with silence, gestures, or paradox, because silence cuts deeper than logic. Sufi poet Rumi declared that silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation. And in the Hindu Upanishads, the highest truths are conveyed not through words, but through mauna, the sacred silence of realization. Why did so many traditions insist upon silence? Because silence is not the absence of life, it is the presence of truth. In the noise of words, the mind becomes scattered. But in silence, the mind aligns itself with the eternal rhythm of the cosmos. Silence is like the black canvas upon which the stars shine. Without that darkness, their light would not be visible. Without silence, the inner voice of the soul cannot be heard. Thus, in the context of esoteric wisdom, silence is not passive. It is active, dynamic, creative. It is the fertile soil in which wisdom grows, the hidden current beneath the surface of existence. Those who master silence are no longer tossed about by the chaos of life. Instead, they become attuned to the quiet harmony that sustains all things. The ancients knew to speak from silence is to speak with power, and to live in silence, even for moments each day, is to live in alignment with the mystery of creation itself.
To truly grasp the spiritual power of silence, we must look deeper than the cultural practices and mystical traditions. We must understand what silence is, not just as an outer condition, but as an inner force that transforms consciousness itself. At the simplest level, silence is the absence of noise. But spiritually, silence is not absence, it is presence. It is not emptiness, it is fullness. Imagine standing in the stillness of a forest at dawn. No traffic, no human voices, only the quiet pulse of life. At first, it feels like nothing is happening. But then, you begin to hear the subtleties, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the heartbeat of the earth beneath your feet. Silence doesn't erase sound, it reveals what is hidden within it. This is the essence of spiritual silence. It unveils what ordinary awareness cannot perceive. Our minds are like turbulent rivers, always flowing with thoughts, worries, and desires. In silence, that river calms and the depths become visible. You begin to see the currents that shape your thoughts, the roots of your emotions, and the vastness of awareness itself. The mystics described this as the voice of silence, a paradox because silence has no voice, and yet, in the quiet, something speaks. It is not a voice made of words, but a resonance, an intuition, a knowing that transcends the intellect. It is the whisper of the soul, the echo of the divine, the background hum of the universe. To hear it, you must go beyond language, beyond noise, beyond yourself. Let us use an analogy. Consider a musical instrument. When the strings of a violin vibrate, sound is born. But if the space around those strings did not exist, if there were no silence to receive the vibration, the music would be chaos, unbearable noise. Music lives not just in sound, but in the silence between sounds. Without silence, melody collapses. Without silence, rhythm is impossible. Life itself is the same. We are surrounded by motion, but without silence, we cannot sense the harmony behind it. Silence also has a profound effect on the human psyche. Modern science confirms what mystics have always known. Silence heals. Studies show that 2 hours of silence each day can regenerate brain cells in the hippocampus, the region linked to learning and memory. Silence lowers blood pressure, reduces stress, and restores the nervous system. But beyond these biological effects, silence touches something deeper. It realigns us with what is real. Think of silence as a mirror. When you sit in silence, distractions fade, and the mirror of your inner being becomes clear. Suddenly, you see your own fears, your hidden desires, your unspoken truths. This is why many resist silence. It confronts them with themselves. Noise is a shield. Silence is a revelation. Yet only through this revelation can transformation occur. Esoterically, silence is often linked to the element of air or ether, the unseen medium that connects all things. Just as sound travels through the air, spirit moves through silence. In meditation, silence is the medium through which consciousness expands. In prayer, silence is the offering that allows the divine to respond. In ritual, silence is the container that amplifies sacred intention. But perhaps the most mysterious aspect of silence is its connection to creation itself. In many traditions, the universe was born from silence. The Rig Veda, one of the oldest spiritual texts, describes the beginning as a great stillness before the first sound arose, Om. In the Bible, creation begins not with chaos, but with the word, spoken into silence. The Taoists teach that the Tao, the unnameable source, exists in eternal stillness, from which movement emerges. Silence is the womb of existence. All things rise from it, and all things return to it. To understand silence, then, is to understand the hidden structure of reality. Silence is not something you practice only in meditation. It is the background of all experience. It is here now, beneath the noise of these words, between each heartbeat, in the pause before you inhale. The problem is not that silence is absent. It is that we have forgotten how to notice it. The spiritual path, therefore, is not about creating silence, but about remembering it. Silence is always present, like the sky behind the clouds. The mystics tell us, do not fear silence. Do not run from it. Enter it. Embrace it. Listen to it. For in silence lies the key to wisdom, healing, and awakening. In the next part of this exploration, we will go even deeper. We will examine the paradoxes of silence, how it can be both terrifying and liberating, both empty and full. We will uncover how silence relates to language, power, and the mysteries of initiation. And we will see why, even today, silence remains one of the most misunderstood yet most essential forces in spiritual life.
Silence is a paradox. On one hand, it is the absence of speech, the withdrawal of sound. On the other, it is the most profound presence one can encounter. Many people fear silence because they think it represents emptiness or loneliness. But in the esoteric traditions, silence was never emptiness. It was the hidden fullness that words could never contain. Think of it this way. A cup is useful not because of the clay that forms its walls, but because of the empty space inside. Without that space, the cup cannot hold anything. In the same way, silence is the space in which wisdom, truth, and creation can dwell. Words without silence are like walls without space, solid but useless. This is why silence has always been linked with initiation into higher knowledge. In the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece, initiates were bound by vows of secrecy. Not only were the rites themselves conducted in silence, but those who went through them were forbidden to describe what they had experienced. Why? Because the experience was beyond words, and words would only diminish its power. Silence was both protection and transmission. The sacred knowledge could only live within the initiate, not be handed over in speech. In Hinduism, we find the practice of Mauna, the discipline of silence. Great sages like Ramana Maharshi would sit in silence, and disciples reported that they received more wisdom from his quiet presence than from 1,000 words. Maharshi himself once said, "Silence is unceasing eloquence. It is the best language." His teaching reminds us that silence communicates not by the vibration of sound, but by the vibration of being. Here lies another paradox. Silence communicates. At first glance, this seems impossible. How can silence say anything? And yet, anyone who has sat in the presence of a true master, or even in the stillness of a sacred place, knows that silence speaks more clearly than speech. It speaks directly to the soul, bypassing the intellect. But silence also carries power in the realm of speech itself. Words that emerge from silence carry a different weight. They're measured, deliberate, infused with presence. Consider the difference between someone who babbles endlessly and someone who speaks rarely, but when they do, each word resonates. Silence sharpens language. It is the whetstone against which the sword of speech is honed. This is why great orators and mystics alike used silence as part of their teaching. The Buddha often remained silent when asked questions that could not be answered by logic. His silence was not ignorance, it was mastery. He knew that some truths cannot be spoken, only realized. In Zen Buddhism, the most famous koans are sometimes answered with silence, a gesture or a laugh. The silence itself is the answer. And yet silence is not always comfortable. For many, it feels threatening. This is because silence strips away the distractions we use to avoid ourselves. In silence, the ego begins to dissolve, and the truth of our being begins to surface. This process can feel like death, the death of who we think we are. That is why so many traditions describe silence as both terrifying and liberating. To sit in silence is to face yourself without disguise. Your fears, your regrets, your unhealed wounds, they all rise to the surface when the noise stops. But if you endure, silence becomes the healer. It absorbs pain, clarifies confusion, and restores balance. It does not erase what you are. It reveals what you have always been. Esoteric texts often describe silence as the guardian of the threshold. Before one enters the mysteries of higher knowledge, one must pass through the gate of silence. This silence tests the seeker. Can you face yourself? Can you surrender the endless chatter of the mind? Can you trust the unknown? Only when these questions are answered not with words but with stillness can the initiate step forward. There is also a cosmic dimension to silence. The Kabbalistic tradition speaks of Ein Sof, the infinite, which is beyond all sound, all form, all name. In that infinite silence, creation stirs and emerges as vibration, light, and sound. Likewise, in Hindu cosmology, the primordial silence gave birth to Om, the vibration of the universe itself. Science, too, reveals a similar mystery, the great silence of space, where stars are born and galaxies move, is not emptiness, but a vast field of unseen energy. Thus, silence is not just personal, it is cosmic. When you enter silence, you are aligning with the silence that existed before the first word, the first sound, the first spark of creation. You are aligning with eternity. And here lies the final paradox. Silence is not opposed to sound. It is its foundation. Just as darkness makes light visible, silence makes sound meaningful. To understand silence is to understand sound. To embrace silence is to embrace life itself. So when mystics speak of silence, they are not telling you to withdraw from the world or to deny sound. They are teaching you to root yourself in the source, the silence beneath all things, so that when you act, speak, and live, you do so from that inexhaustible well. The spiritual power of silence is therefore the power of origin. It is the power of transformation. It is the power of truth. And most importantly, it is a power available to you, not in some distant temple or hidden cave, but here, in this very moment, if you choose to listen. In the next section, we will explore how to harness this power in daily life. We will uncover practical exercises to cultivate silence, integrate it into modern living, and use it as a tool for healing, clarity, and spiritual awakening. For silence is not just a mystical idea, it is a living practice, one that can change everything about how you experience yourself and the world.
Mystical teachings about silence may feel profound, but the real question is, how do we bring this into our daily lives? Silence is not meant to remain a lofty ideal, locked away in monasteries or ancient texts. It is a living practice, accessible to anyone, anywhere. And the more we invite silence into our lives, the more its power begins to shape us, quietly, steadily, like the moon pulling the tides. Let us explore some ways to practice silence, not just as an absence of sound, but as a spiritual discipline. 1. Creating sacred spaces of silence. The first step is intentionality. Choose a time and place each day to enter silence. This could be early morning before the world awakens, or late at night when everything is still. Sit comfortably, turn off distractions, and allow silence to envelop you. At first, your mind will resist.
Thoughts will rush in, demanding attention. Do not fight them. Simply return to the awareness of silence, like a river flowing beneath the chatter. Over time, your mind will grow accustomed to this new rhythm. Consider lighting a candle, burning incense, or using a simple gesture, such as closing your eyes with both hands over your heart, to mark the beginning of your silence. These small rituals train the mind to recognize that silence is sacred. 2. Practicing active silence. Silence is not only about sitting still. You can practice active silence during daily tasks. For example, while walking, refrain from listening to music or engaging in conversation. Allow yourself to simply walk in silence, observing your breath, your steps, the sounds of nature around you. Washing dishes, preparing food, or even commuting can become opportunities to rest in silence. This transforms silence into a constant companion, not just something reserved for meditation. 3. The power of pausing. One of the simplest ways to access silence is by pausing. Before speaking, take a brief moment of silence. Before reacting, pause. This short interval allows you to respond from presence rather than from impulse. Words that arise after a pause are sharper, clearer, and carry greater weight. Try this in conversations. Notice how silence often makes others lean in, listen more deeply, and respond more sincerely. Silence is not emptiness in dialogue. It is depth. 4. Silent retreats. For those ready to dive deeper, consider a day or even just a few hours of complete silence. No speaking, no reading, no writing, no devices. At first, this feels uncomfortable, even unbearable. But after a few hours, you begin to notice something remarkable. Your senses sharpen. You hear the subtle hum of existence. Your inner dialogue slows down. Insights begin to emerge. Silent retreats, even short ones, are powerful tools of transformation. They break the addictive cycle of constant stimulation and reconnect you with your inner self. Silence in prayer and meditation. Silence is the true foundation of prayer. After you speak your prayers, do not rush away. Sit in silence and listen. Often the answer to prayer does not come in words, but in a deep inner stillness. In meditation, rather than striving to silence the mind, simply notice the silence that already exists between thoughts. Every thought arises, fades, and leaves behind a moment of silence. Rest in that gap. Gradually, the gaps grow wider, and the silence begins to shine through. Facing the discomfort. It is important to acknowledge that silence can be difficult. Many people feel restless, anxious, or even fearful in silence. This is normal. The noise of the world often distracts us from our inner wounds. When silence arrives, those wounds come to the surface. Instead of fleeing, allow silence to hold those emotions. Imagine silence as a vast ocean into which you can release your fears, your regrets, your pain. The ocean does not resist. It absorbs and transforms. Over time, silence becomes not a threat, but a refuge. 7. Silence as daily renewal. Think of silence as you would think of sleep. Just as the body cannot function without rest, the soul cannot function without silence. A few minutes of silence each day can refresh you more deeply than hours of noise-filled distraction. Start small. Even 3 minutes of complete silence in the morning can set the tone for your entire day. Gradually extend it. Make silence a habit, not an exception. 8. Living from silence. The ultimate practice is not just entering silence, but carrying silence with you. This doesn't mean avoiding sound or speech. It means remaining rooted in the inner stillness that silence awakens. You can laugh, talk, and live actively while remaining inwardly anchored in silence. This is what the mystics meant when they spoke of being in the world but not of it. Outwardly active, inwardly silent. Outwardly speaking, inwardly listening. Outwardly moving, inwardly still.
Silence is not escape. It is empowerment. It does not weaken your connection to life, it strengthens it. In silence, you discover that you are not just a body in a noisy world, but a consciousness rooted in eternity. And when you return from silence into sound, your words, your actions, your very presence carry a new quality: calm, clarity, and depth. By practicing silence, you are not withdrawing from the world. You are reclaiming your place within it, anchored, aware, and awake. In the final section, we will gather all these insights into a closing reflection, showing how silence, once embraced, becomes not just a practice, but a way of being. Silence is not a luxury. It is not a rare state reserved for monks in monasteries or sages in caves. Silence is your birthright, woven into the very fabric of your being. Beneath the endless flow of words, beneath the noise of the world and the chatter of your mind, silence is always present. Like the sky behind the clouds, it waits patiently for you to notice it again. We began this journey with a question. What if silence is not the absence of sound, but the womb from which all creation emerges? Now we can see that this is not just poetry, it is truth. Every word, every song, every heartbeat is born from silence. And when all things pass, they return to silence. To embrace silence, then, is to embrace the cycle of existence itself. The ancients knew this. They guarded silence as the gate to higher wisdom. They practiced it as a discipline, revered it as a power, and used it as a mirror to see the soul. Modern science, too, now whispers the same truth. Silence heals the brain, restores the body, and renews the mind. But beyond all theories, silence offers something even greater: a direct encounter with reality, unfiltered, unbroken, whole. What happens when you allow silence into your life? You begin to hear the subtle voice within, the one that is drowned out by constant noise. You begin to act with greater clarity, to speak with greater power, to live with greater presence. Silence does not weaken you, it strengthens you. It does not separate you from life, it roots you deeper into it. So I invite you, tonight when the world grows quiet, turn off the distractions and listen, not to music, not to voices, but to the silence itself. Notice how it is not empty, but alive. Notice how in silence, your breath slows, your thoughts soften, your heart feels lighter. That silence is not outside you, it is you. Carry this with you. Let silence become your teacher, your healer, your companion. Use it in small pauses, in daily practices, in moments of overwhelm. And remember that true silence is not just found in stillness, but in the way you live, in speaking from a place of presence, in acting without noise, in listening to the eternal within. The spiritual power of silence is the power of return. Return to your essence. Return to the source. Return to the mystery that no word can capture. Silence is not the end of the journey, it is the beginning. For in silence, you are closest to truth. And in truth, you are finally free. Now I ask you, when was the last time you truly listened to silence? Tonight, give yourself that gift. Step into the infinite, not with words, not with thoughts, but with silence, and let it speak.